If you could talk to the dead, who would you talk to first? My grandma Quinn. The last time I saw her, she wanted me to snuggle on her lap. She was connected to so many machines, I was terrified. I told her that since I was 6 I was too old to snuggle with her. She died 2 days later. There's not a day that goes by that I wish I could snuggle up to her and tell her all I've been through. Tell her about my amazing husband and my 2 beautiful sons. She was half Cherokee and looked like a goddess. She had the kindest heart and loved me dearly. I love you, Grammy, and I'm sorry I couldn't give you the comfort you needed at that time. I wouldn't. I lost both my mum and my husband in the last 3 years. Knowing there was life after death would probably make the longing even worse. Then, I would have to ask them, are you happy? Either answer would haunt me. What if the afterlife is terrible? What if it's wonderful and they don't miss me at all? ... Now, if the question was who would you want to hug and hold, that I can answer. AI is an awesome movie that tries to answer the question of what is grief after a human loves. What makes us real? Prayers to the blue fairy. Not sure what for. I've spoken to the dead. It's not as hard as you'd think. Look at a picture or imagine the person in some way. Begin talking to them in your head. See what they say. I differentiate the dead from my thoughts by the feel of the thought. If it's not me, it flows to me seemingly out of nowhere. If it's my own thought, I know it's me, the thought just feels like me. It's like telepathy, which you can do with the living too. Jesus, Cleopatra, your deceased relatives, roadkill, pets, whoever worth a try. The best time to do this IMO is in bed when the light is off. I'm torn between 2 people, either my grandmother or my grandfather. My grandmother was always present my entire life. Every holiday, every birthday, every school event. I loved that woman so much. She passed away 2018 from cancer. I just miss her and wish I could have had more time with her as an adult. But on the other hand, I never got to meet my grandfather. He passed away when my dad was 18. It'd be interesting to have that opportunity since I never had it. I know my dad wishes his dad had lived long enough to have met my brother and I. My grandpa. He passed near the end of last year, and before that, while I assisted a lot while his health declined in his final 6-8 weeks. I didn't spend enough time with him before that for years. We had a lot planned and now won't ever get to do it. And it's weighing heavy on me and my psyche. And while talking to him again, it won't help. I would at least get the chance to apologize. The side of my family he was on my dad's side doesn't usually show emotions nor apologize for mistakes, let alone admitting to them. My mother, she died on Wednesday, January 21st, 1976, at 06:40. I was 12 at the time. We had just been told, as a family, of her cancer diagnosis on Friday, January 16th. We were supposed to go see her on Tuesday, the day before she died. And I had a bit of a meltdown at school during the day and wasn't up to going to the hospital that evening. The hospital called the next morning at 06:30 to tell us that her passing was near. It's been almost 50 years, and I still remember that morning quite vividly. My best friend who passed away in November 2023, and I'm still learning how to go through life without her. If it would help me or make me go crazy, as I would probably opt out of talking to the living and talk to her non-stop since we were best buds and talked every day about everything and anything. I miss her very much. Never had a chance to say goodbye. I would like a chance to tell her how much I loved her with my whole heart just one more time. My ex's niece, whenever he babysat, he'd have me come over and stick me with the baby, and he'd go to bed knowing I wouldn't leave her alone with someone who is passed out. I developed a bond with her and adored watching her grow. Unfortunately, she died of SIDS. We broke up before she passed. I got to go to her funeral, but it was extremely uncomfortable, and I was very much judged. It would be extremely nice to say goodbye properly and let her know how much I cared about her. I mow yards for a living. There's this really old cemetery I mow. I have some relatives buried there. Some of the graves are as old as mid-1800s. For someone in Europe that isn't super old. But this is Texas, and I think it's pretty old. My mum's grandfather even helped build the church near it. Hit his name on a plaque next to a couple other names I'm not familiar with. I'd probably speak to some spirits there first. My father. He's been gone over 30 years now. For the first year or two, I'd reach for the phone to call him about something before I realized he wasn't there. After that, my sister, who's been gone over 20 years now, much too young. My mother would also be on a list, but we had lots of time together. She's only been gone a few years now. She's want to know what the new owners of the house were doing to her garden. My great-grandma. She died when I was 6, and I have only a few memories of her left. Sadly, I cannot recall the sound of her voice, both because of how young I was at the time of her death, and because it's been almost 21 years since she died. I am blind and cannot therefore see photos of her either. So I would love to have just one more conversation with her to solidify my memories somewhat. Probably my boyfriend's dad. He committed suicide a month and a half ago, and nobody saw it coming. I just want to tell him all the things I feel. He accepted me the way I was, without questions. Trans, cool, mentally ill. Feel free to talk. I knew him for around a year, and yet I trusted this man more than my own parents. I would want him to know how much of an impact his kindness had on me. My best friend. He died in early 2021, and I miss him so damn much. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him and wish I could talk to him. There are also peculiar aspects to his death that I'd love the answer to. It was immediately ruled a suicide by the police, but his girlfriend at the time exhibited a lot of weird behaviors and a few things didn't really line up. Probably my dad. He was Muslim and living in the Middle East when he died. So he was already buried before I even got the phone call telling me he'd died. In Islam, as in Judaism, the dead are buried before sunset on the day they die. If at all possible, I'll talk with my brother next. For sure. I at least talked with him about 36 hours before he died unexpectedly. My dad for sure. He died on Father's Day when I was 15 in 2008. He was in and out of prison a lot during the time we were both living. I know he had a lot of trauma from childhood that made him the way he was. That's made it somewhat easier to forgive him after all these years. I'd like to just tell him in person I'm sorry he had a rough life and I love my granddad. He passed away when I was 15, and I never got to see him in the years leading up to his death. He played me a piece of music which became my favorite from the moment I heard it. It also inspired my own music compositions and taste throughout my life. I'm now 42, and I wish I could tell him how much he positively influenced my life. This might seem weird, but I'd like to talk to the first dog I had as an adult. Otis was the best. He's been gone for years, and I still think about what a great dog he was and how special he made my life. I've lost most of my family years ago. Of course, I think about them occasionally. But for some reason, Otis was the first thing I thought of. And tell me their ideas that they didn't have written down, and they're good ideas because they're geniuses, and I can use them and become famous and be recognized as a genius even though I'm actually not. I guess to my mum's grandma or to my mom's aunt's husband. Mum's grandma died when I was 3, would have wanted to hear about her life. It's not really talked about a lot. Mum's aunt's husband died few months ago. Didn't get to see him in the hospital. I would have liked to have been there to talk to him before he died. He was a man with humor. Elvis. Don't know why. That's just the first name that popped up. MLK would be another good one. I'd want his opinion on where we've ended up so far. Genghis Khan would be fun. Lots of villains would be. I put quotations on cause I'm not sure that category really describes the people that do ill will on the real world. Edit Jimmy Hoffa. My maternal grandparents and my father-in-law lost both grandparents within 6 months of each other back in 2001. And I've thought about them almost daily ever since. My father-in-law passed away suddenly, September 2021, and I miss him. My wife's family was always close and family-oriented, and there's been a massive gap ever since. My grandfather, he passed away in 2013, from what I hear. He loved to write and had many stories to tell. We lived in different countries, so I never got to spend much time with him. To this day, I still haven't been able to get my hands on his writings because we have some family issues, and all his diaries and books are with my aunt. My good friend that passed away last spring, I tried so very hard for well over a decade to help him get his life in order, but it ended up affecting me in such a negative way that I had to cut him out for a while. When I had reached out to talk about a year later, learned he was in a diabetic coma he never really recovered from. My tata, he had such a huge inspiration in my life, and he was such an amazing guy. I miss him more and more every single day. I wish I would have been able to say goodbye to him. He had a pretty rough but luckily short battle with cancer. I'm sure he's in a better place now though. Hopefully out fishing in Baja. He loved it so much. I lost my mum last July 4th, and when she was in the hospital for what I thought was just supposed to be overnight. She passed at 5:00 a.m. So I wasn't at her bedside, although my dad and sister were. There's also the last girl I was with, who passed during lockdown, and the last girl I was in love with, who passed in 2005.